It's Luke Johnson here, Revizto Implementation Director for APAC. Today we're going to look at the sync of clashes from Navisworks to Revizto, and especially at the advanced status mapping. Now, a step we want to do to prepare first of all is to create some stamps to help manage this process. So what we're looking at is a project in Revizto 5. The model has been federated in Navisworks and exported here, and it's already existing in the cloud. We're going to go into our stamps area, and from scratch we're going to create a category called Clash Sync, and we're going to create a couple of stamps which ultimately will capture the workflow around our clash detection. So we generally create these at the discipline level. So I'm creating one here, architectural clash, and these stamps will drive our assigning and reporting of all the clashes coming from Navisworks. So looking here at this one, it's an architectural clash. We could set a color if we want. We could set a priority, a default priority. The main thing we want to do here is make sure that the architectural clash gets assigned to the architect, in this case, Duncan. And we'll also tag those issues with the discipline, because this will assist with some reporting and dashboarding. Now at the folder level, let's make all of our clashes public so they'll be visible to the whole team. We've now set up the architectural clash stamp with its assignee and tag. Let's now create another stamp, this time for structural. Perhaps we use a different color, and in this case Charbel can be the structural engineer, and we'll create a tag for that. And finally we'll create one for mechanical. And Vlad can be the mechanical engineer. So what we've set up is a workflow around clash detection now, because we know that if we create this stamp, the architectural clash stamp, and link it to one of our Navisworks clash issues, then it's going to be automatically assigned and automatically tagged, which will really start to speed up our overall process. All right, so we've done our preparatory steps here. We've got the stamps created. We're now going to jump into Navisworks and look at the sync process. So over in Navisworks here, we've got our federated model, as in we've got the three disciplines merged together here. We've got an export view that we use to export this model. And we've got some search sets created and so on. So typically you'll have set up this in your own process with your own search sets and your own clash tests. So let's run a structural versus mechanical clash detection now in Navisworks. And we've now found 17 or 1800 clashes here. So what the next step is in any clash process is grouping. And we'll skip over it here, but it's incredibly important to get the grouping right. Some people use a grouping tool like Flypaper to do their grouping. In our case here, let's do a manual grouping exercise based on categories. So I'm going to select all of my cable trays, and I'm going to use an inclusive filter. I'm just going to copy the name there and select all of these cable tray clashes. Group them and paste the name. And we'll do that similarly for some other categories here. So electrical equipment, copy name, group that and paste. Mechanical equipment, and so on. All right, so we've created our groups here, and we've also got a group here for not grouped yet, which could be a piece of work that still needs to be done. For now, we're going to work with just these 4 main ones. Now in Revizto, we generally assume that a group is a piece of work that can be assigned to somebody for action. And it can be a good process to kind of start marking those up even in Navisworks so that we can export a good image, an XML image of these clashes. So one of the first steps we do before syncing usually is go to Report, create a XML report for all tests combined, XML, and write report. And now for the purpose of the training, we're ready to sync our clashes to Revizto. We've got a model created, we've done a clash detection on a single test here, and we've done some basic grouping. So let's go to Revizto 5 and sync clashes. The first part here is a handshake between the cloud and the Revizto project. And this is where we're going to spend most of our time today, is looking at how this dialog box works. Because this configures the settings for syncing our clashes into Revizto as issues. So let's start at the top here. Firstly, the section box size. This is to do with how big the box is around a clash, and generally I prefer a smaller section box just cropped around the elements. If you like to have a section box that spans from floor to floor or level to level, you would tick this box. Import markups for clash groups. We'll use the XML that we just exported to bring those images from Navisworks in. You'll notice we have new options for updating screenshots. And this one, if clash change, will update the screenshot if there's been some change detected with that clash. These options down here are really important to do with mapping or matching our clashes in Navisworks to the Revizto issues. So firstly, this one here, match tests by. Some grouping tools like iConstruct might delete all tests and recreate tests, in which case the only way for Revizto to connect that up would be to use the clash test name. However, many people use a workflow where the clash tests are stable between cycles, in which case you would use match tests by GUID only. Match groups by, we have 2 options. Subclashes within the same test will use an algorithm to figure out which clashes were part of a group and which issue that should connect to. If you use GUID only, then it will connect to the specific clash group in Navisworks to a particular issue in Revizto. I generally prefer this method because when I do my grouping, I preserve existing groups until they're resolved. I don't introduce new clashes to existing groups. So I kind of view a group as locked in time, and my issue in Revizto matches that perfectly so that I can, pass off a piece of work and get it actioned. So this would be my general recommendation for mapping. If you're using a grouping tool that does recreate or regroup everything between cycles, you would need to use the subclashes option. We do have a filtering tool here, which allows us to essentially filter down the overall list of clashes here and groups to only specific ones that we want to sync. I generally don't use this. Instead, I would use like selecting everything and just unticking some specific ones that I do not want to sync. So in the case here, I created a group for not, basically not processed yet. So I'm not going to sync that to Revizto, but these other 4 I will. Now at the test level here, you'll notice we can assign all of these issues to a particular stamp. So selecting the test and clicking the button here, I can choose the stamp that I created earlier. So this is structure versus mechanical. Let's assume that structure is locked in. Then all of these should be assigned to mechanical. All right, now let's look at our status mapping settings. This dialog box can confuse people. So that's why we're going to dive into it now together and really try and understand it. So close issues missing in Navisworks is pretty self-explanatory. If your clashes kind of get either compacted, deleted, basically those issues that might be hanging around in Revizto will get closed by this tick box. Validate geometric conditions will kind of do a recheck of clashes during the sync process to ensure that the clashes kind of get reopened up if they still exist. Now the simple mapping basically tells you how things are going to happen. So it says, if it's a new Navisworks clash or group, it's going to become an open issue in Revizto. But it also defines what happens to things that exist already, clashes that have already been synced to Revizto, how we pull the status back to Navisworks. For example, if an issue has been set to in progress in Revizto, that particular clash or group will be set to reviewed by the sync tool in Navisworks. Now this simple mapping is useful for some users, but generally for coordinators who really understand their process and want to tweak things, they would usually click the advanced view where we see all of the possible scenarios and we're able to configure them. You'll notice that the resolve column is only visible in the advanced view. Now we can import and export settings here, and I'm going to import a particular setting to show you how this could be used in a one-directional sense. So I'm going to import the clash mapping Navis to Revizto only. What this one does is it's really a simple push of status from Navisworks to Revizto. So if it's new, active, or reviewed, it will become an open issue in Revizto. And if the clash has become approved or resolved in Navisworks, it will then become a closed issue in Revizto. And in this particular example, it's not going to pull back any statuses from Revizto to Navisworks. So this could be used in a situation where you want to create your clashes in Revizto and do all of the status management in Revizto, and you just want to use Navisworks to kind of auto close out resolved clashes, and you're not interested in seeing Revizto statuses coming back to Navisworks. So for some people this will achieve what they're after. For others, I would use this kind of mapping. So in this particular example, you can see here the top row. Obviously this should be dashes because this is saying there's no issue in Revizto yet. So really this row here can do nothing anyway. So they should all be basically a do nothing when they're set to dashes. The top row here is for brand new clashes, what's going to happen. So it's a new clash in Navisworks. If it's new or active, it'll become an open issue. If you have used the Navisworks status to reviewed, it'll become in progress, and approved and resolved will be synced to Revizto as closed issues immediately. So I like to do this because it then sets up a baseline, a benchmark, where every single clash in Navisworks does exist in Revizto, even though some will be immediately closed out because they're no longer a geometric clash. In this example here, we do have the in progress and reviewed working together. So if something in Revizto has been set to in progress, then it will be marked as reviewed in Navisworks and vice versa. We do have auto closeout. So if we look at the resolve status here, for anything that exists in Revizto already, it's going to be closed if the resolve status is met. Now that's a special status in Navisworks indicating the geometric clash is gone. So obviously we want those closed in Revizto. Now this area here, solved and approved, is setting up a scenario where you can mark clashes as approved in Navisworks, in which case they become solved issues in Revizto, and vice versa. So if you mark some particular issue as solved in Revizto, it'll become approved in Navisworks. So this is kind of a state where you have seen a clash, the clash is not going away, as in it's still a geometric clash, and it's going to sit in a solved and approved state, generally between the two platforms. Now finally, if you want to forcibly close issues, you can over here. You can close them, and on the push from Revizto to Navisworks, they will also become approved issues. So this is a kind of recommendation on the mapping tool. Obviously, your own workflow will impact on how you use this, whether you want to use an arrangement like this where approved and solved statuses work together, or whether you want to go back to even a more simplified kind of simple push of clashes from Navisworks to Revizto. But really the challenge here is we're dealing with multiple cycles. So when we look at this dialog box, we must think of not just what's happening now, but what happens on the next cycle of clash detection and the one after, and so on. So let's click OK. We've set up our status mapping, and that is actually saved into the project, into the Revizto project. We've set up our stamp here for the automatic assigning. We've configured all of our mapping rules, and we can now press sync. It prompts us or challenges us to choose an XML file, which we exported earlier. And if we open up the Revizto project now, in the issue tracker, you'll notice these 4 issues have been created as per the clash groups we had in Navisworks. You'll notice if we look at the information, they've been automatically assigned, prioritized, and tagged. Myself as the coordinator or creator is a watcher on those issues. And keep in mind that a clash issue is not the same as a stamp. So if I go by type, we have multiple types of issues in Revizto. These are all clashes. The choosing of the stamp in the mapping tool is just purely to pre-populate fields here at creation time. So Vlad would be notified of his newly synced clashes, and he would begin actioning those perhaps in Revit. Now let's just test the theories here. Firstly, for the mechanical equipment issue, he works on it and he sets it to in progress. For the cable trays issue, it gets set to solved because he has essentially either approved it or actioned it in Revit. And let's just do a test here in Navisworks, or kind of trick the system a little bit. So what we're doing here is we're essentially removing that clash. It's going to become resolved. All right. So we've done some status changes in Revizto, and we've also done some status changes, or you know, we're essentially going to see a different result here in Navisworks. So let's go through the next cycle. So we're in the next cycle now. We're going to go to our home view as usual. We're going to run, and you'll notice, you know, this clash here that we kind of tricked the system is now become resolved. And we're now going to do sync clashes again. So these here are all grayed out. They're already detected as part of the system. We can't untick them. That relationship is maintained as we want it to be. This here is showing us the Navisworks status of that particular clash as of right now, prior to the sync. In this case, I'm going to choose no to update screenshots. We'll just keep the previous screenshot. And I'm going to press sync. So firstly, in Revizto, the clash that is now resolved or gone has been automatically closed as expected. In Navisworks, in the Clash Detective, we can see the statuses have been pulled across from Revizto, as we should expect as well. So we have the issues that in Revizto we marked as in progress or solved have been marked as reviewed or approved here in Navisworks. So we've now had a deep dive into status mapping, and hopefully this has helped you understand how it works and how to set it up. Once it's set up and is working well, it can really be a really efficient and automated process, particularly with the capability we have now of assigning and tagging issues as they are synced in from Navisworks using the stamp templating option. Thanks for listening to this learning session.